that's when the penny dropped for me around this conversation I'm going to mark is we have no unique positioning. We're just another website company, and there are a dime a dozen. A kid in his bedroom is doing websites. Okay. So I went in and I said, we need to refocus, we need to repivot. And we made the decision then and there in a Gateshead Cafe that afternoon that we're going to completely repivot the business. We're going to only do mobile apps. That is what we're going to do. And we went and announced it to the business. And also, by the way, we have no money to pay anybody.
Cameras are recording, so
is that the official?
That was the
is that the hello and welcome to TriPOD, your film podcast? What did I say?
Actual, just the natural.
Yeah,
don't have to say anything, which is great.
Yeah. Well, the good thing is, Sarat is going to be the sort of guest I predict, where we just give him a little prompt and then he fills in a lot of time with a good detailed answer. Yeah, exactly. Well, on that point, I was going to say that our guest today is, don't be offended by this, but we refer to you as LinkedIn famous in the office. Yeah, I know you like to spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. You're very fond of the Be the Hedgehog hashtag, etc. Always got plenty of opinions on LinkedIn, which is good. I was trying to work out, it must be about 15 years that we've known each other now, and obviously worked together at different points during that time, and have seen you grow from where you started to where you are now. And in my opinion, I don't think this is controversial, but I'd say Hedgehog Lab is clearly a Northeast success story. It's a business which has grown and thrived, so that's why you're here to talk about that. I've put a note here that says that you are many things, and the things that I boiled it down to were personable, opinionated, verbose, and passionate about your industry. Is that fair?
I think that's a fair description. Yeah, that's a fair description.
So please, everyone, welcome Sarat from Hedgehog Lab, one of the co-founders of Hedgehog Lab, in fact. So we'll start with the obvious, which is give us just the nutshell kind of appraisal of what your early life was like and how you made the decision to move here to the UK and start education first before you got into business.
Perfect. No, thank you for having me on TriPOD. Really pleased to be here. I'll probably address the first point, which is my unofficial job title at Hedgehog Lab is actually Chief LinkedIn Officer. So, I've got to do it right. It's my job title. But no, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and a fairly good introduction and a description. My early life, it's really interesting. We had a session today at work where we're trying to humanize the company a little bit. And my brother was invited onto the town hall to talk about exactly my early life, what I was as a child, what I was. I was always pretty driven, through a young age, and I guess I had an entrepreneurial bug quite early. One thing that's interesting about me, and I actually put it on LinkedIn, and it's a great introduction because I was trying to be a brain surgeon. That was what I was actually studying to be.
Oh,
wow. A doctor, and I found computers just by accident. So computers were never, growing up, computers was never my passion. I never really thought that I would get into computers, and actually only got a computer because it helped me study for my med school. And then I got obsessed. I taught myself HTML, C++, etc. And I actually dropped out of med school to come into computers, which obviously was interesting because all my life I'd been prepping to go to med school, and the plan was to go to Harvard Med. My being Indian, my parents have very high standards. Like if you don't go to the top 3 schools, then are you somebody? So the plan was to go to med school, but then obviously I'd prepped my whole life. I took in all the subjects in my A-levels, GCSEs equivalents to go to med school. And then suddenly I dropped truth bomb on my dad, which is I'm not going to med school anymore. The problem was I didn't have the right qualifications to get into computer science. So I hadn't taken maths at A-levels and stuff because I was focusing more on biology and all the things that gets you into med school. So that Harvard dream was gone. I wasn't getting into Harvard, no chance. So then he said, okay, well, if not Harvard, maybe you can get into Stanford or MIT or something like that in computer science.
What are the fallbacks? Yeah.
Exactly. But similarly, in my SATs and stuff, because I hadn't done maths, I couldn't get into Ivy League American tech institutes, so Caltech, MIT, and Stanford wouldn't accept me. And actually, that leads on to the interesting part of the journey. I used to live in Dubai at that time when I was studying, and I just moved there. And there was this University of Southampton or Southampton Institute that came around doing a bit of a road show, trying to attract international students. And I mean, it sounds, it sounds probably worse than it is, but, and they said, we got no requirements to enter our university. Like, you literally just turn up, like, as long as you've done some A levels and stuff, you can just, so the bar was much lower than Ivy League. So I know, people always think there's a romanticized story of why I came to the UK. I'm sorry to say the UK was a second choice to the US. So Southampton was the only place that would have me in a software engineering course, which is what I came to, because no one else would take it. And also I loved Southampton. They had this lovely, like, talking about the power of video, right? And what you guys do. They had this beautiful video, like, they distribute out to people. And honestly, I was so mesmerized by Southampton. It was like beautiful parks and the marina, etc.
The sun was shining in every shot of that video, I'll bet.
I honestly, listen, that more so than the fact that they would have me because I didn't have the qualifications. Again, like lots of people, my wife laughs at it. I came to Southampton not because it has great education, but because I loved the video. The video really sold it to me. Because it sold the dream of what it would be like to live in Southampton. And to be honest, it was true. Like, Southampton was a bit. So that's how I came to the UK. So I migrated over. I came to do my software engineering as a software engineer in Southampton Institute. And to be honest, it was a great experience. Like I said, the video sold everything the way it was. It was a opportunity for me to get into software engineering because I hadn't had the background, having done medicine and med prep most of my life. It was a really interesting experience. I really enjoyed university in the first couple of years. The big challenge for me was because I'd self-taught myself so much, I found university a bit boring, right? So I remember the first course I took, which was like Introduction to C, I scored 98% grade on that subject because I already taught all of this. So I was getting really bored. So the second semester, I'd go to school, college, and university, and I'd be taught things that I'd learned like 3 or 4 years ago, self-taught. So it was a tough one for me because, I didn't get out of university with a good grade, but not because I just got disengaged with it. But when I got disengaged with it, I didn't really got passionate around entrepreneurism. So I was programming stuff. I was doing some freelance work as an international student. At that time, you were allowed to do like 20 hours worth of work or something, paid work. And I got obsessed with it, started building a network and really kind of got obsessed with it. And that's where the entrepreneurial bug really took over, which is, yes, university was good and I enjoyed the social aspects of it, but the learning wasn't there because when you've already learned a lot of those things, university didn't really teach me anything new. On the technical side, it taught me a complete different thing around what it is to work in teams. It taught me about, all the soft skills, which to be honest, I didn't have, because as a youngster, I was quite a quiet person, which is tough to believe now. In terms of what I say, I was quite reserved. I'm still an introvert to a large extent. So it was really difficult to build those skills. So university, that's what I created university with, not the technical education, but the soft skills. And that was kind of how I got into this career, really.
Which is really interesting from our perspective because one of the earliest episodes we did was about whether or not you needed to have a degree to work in our industry. And I think a lot of what you described there crosses over perfectly because, basically our position is the degree, obviously, rubber stamp something, but it's really when you're coming to us and saying, can we work together? We're looking at it from obviously what you've created, what your attitude is, other things can be taught around that. So it is interesting that you kind of had a bit of an experience there where you felt like you weren't learning the things that technically they were there to teach you, but obviously good that you still managed to get something from the experience and started to build your network, which is obviously crucial as well. And so many people have said to me that that's the main thing that they got from university was that they started to build a network, which obviously in our position comes in very handy, doesn't it? So that's what got you kind of into the UK, but obviously not into the Northeast. So I know that you did a couple of other, you're doing freelance jobs, that kind of thing. Actually, on that point, how did you begin to get clients? Because you've said that you weren't before that necessarily entrepreneurial. So how did you actually find your first freelance client?
Yeah, so that's a really good point. And that was really tough, right? I mean, the 20 hours a week, I mean, some of it came through university because programming was still quite a rare skill because I went to university in 99. Lots of people weren't doing it. And, even the people, so a lot of my peers at that age who would work for peanuts. Didn't know much, so I knew much, but I would work for peanuts. So it was a perfect combination. So if you were, one of those local companies, and there were smaller companies, would you rather pay like a proper IT consultant, or would you pay an 18-year-old kid that would work, like I said, in the evenings and not charge much? So some of it was just through luck, through introductions to the university, but it was really uncomfortable. And it's funny, just to sidestep on the point about university education. I think we value graduate studies, but I think we have a big challenge, and I try to engage with the education sector on this, is that what university still doesn't do, and it's funny because I credit what I got out of it as the soft skills, is they don't actively develop the soft skills, and I think it's getting better now. Maybe if you do an MBA, they develop those things. So it was really difficult, and actually, funnily, the freelancing was not the most important bit, because the freelancing was more fun. Like, money wasn't the element of it. Like, I didn't need the money. My parents paid for my education, so I come from a different environment where I didn't have to fund a student loan or fund my own living. So my parents funded all of it. So the freelancing was much more in terms of just enjoying doing what I do more. I can't honestly claim that I made a lot of money with it, right? I mean, it was enough to pub money, but it wasn't like life changing. Although I did earn a lot, and I used to spend most of it on the weekends. I think the bit so that bit was obviously not. But I did start my first business then, so that's when I had this great idea at that time of building. I guess everybody claims that what was Salesforce, right? Salesforce start. And I had this great idea of the CRM and database, and I was learning technology, server technologies, etc. And I built this really amazing, and honestly, it was like Salesforce. It was like a database back front end where you could configure your own, contacts, etc. It was a brilliant tool. And I started my first business there. And actually, funnily, I finished education. And obviously, if you talked about coming to the UK, I came to the UK on a student visa. So I couldn't obviously legally stay after that. And I actually got what is called an innovators visa that the government was handing out in 2001, 2002, because I had this amazing business plan I put together around creating effectively the Salesforce, really. And they gave me a visa. I was like, I thought, they probably won't, but I got it. I got an innovators visa because they said mine was in the top 10% of the ideas that they'd published. The challenge was I took a typical engineer's approach to building software, which is I spent all my time on my desk in my room building the software, didn't think about marketing, didn't think about selling, didn't really have a business plan. I mean, the business plan was I'd create something great. So I really struggled. I built this software, and I was always baffled why nobody was willing to actually pay for it and take the service on. So that business failed horrendously. But what it taught me was the kind of the school of hard knocks, in that I quickly realized that part of what I was missing was the sales and marketing. And my sales methodology was really poor, which was going to local businesses and trying to sell them. And, local mom and pop businesses didn't really have the need for a complicated Salesforce-like CRM. Yeah. So I didn't have the foresight that you have now with all the start, and the community in the startup world wasn't great in the 1999, 2000s, right? There was no community. There was no lean canvas. There was no, VC list of VCs and startup grind and,
still kind of the Wild West, because it was the dot-com boom, as it was known, and people were, if you were able to even code a website, you could get rich from it, basically.
Exactly. You had a university advisor that was supposed to be the innovation advisor, and they're ready to take a bank loan, and I'm like I literally, I'm a student living here in a student flat eating beans on toast. No one's going to give us a bank. So the ecosystem wasn't developed. So I think it was a lot of immaturity, and the approach I took was typically what engineers do, which is build a great product. And by the way, everybody will see the magnificence of this, and this is technically it was a brilliant product, but there was no point. It didn't work, and that business failed horribly. So that was a failure. And I think the question you asked is, how do you get to the Northeast? I think the question is. So while that was happening, I met my now wife, and actually the story again isn't that exciting. My wife's based in.
She might do differently.
Yeah. So yeah. I mean, she knows this. And honestly, I used to live in Southampton then, and travel between London. And it's funny, I tell this story all the time, and actually I'm dragged out by NGI to sell the benefits of the Northeast. I remember this was in 2004, And we decided to get married, and we met, and we're seeing each other long distance. Like we need to get together. And so I was like, I remember that conversation where literally I assumed, okay, so you're going to move to Southampton, right? And she's like, no, but you're going to move to Newcastle, right? And I said, Newcastle? Like, what's in Newcastle? And I don't want to swear on a podcast, but I was like, it's like a asshole, like, ooh, like there's nothing there, like, it's just like far in the bird.
I just built you as a big success story. This
No,
right?
no, but it is. And then obviously, like I said, I moved here, and the challenge for me was I was young. I didn't know anybody in Newcastle. Like I built my network in Southampton. I built my network in London. I didn't have family in the UK. So the story of moving to Newcastle was pretty much, my wife said it's either that or divorce, and I was like,
That's a good motivator.
it's a very good motivation.
So is that when you became part of Think?
That's right. So that was kind of the natural evolution. So that's part of the challenge, in that I am unemployable, right? I am a bad employee. Like you couldn't employ me. But the challenge was, I moved to Newcastle, newly married. We just got a house. My wife had just come off a student loan. She was a nurse, and my aspiration was, I'm just going to do a business. But I didn't have the energy. And then when you got a student loan and we're starting to start a family, I just didn't feel like I could spend another 2 years building my network here. I knew nobody in Newcastle, so it seemed like the easiest thing to do is get a job. Actually, Think wasn't my first job in Newcastle. There was another company called Spark Response down in Follingsby. I think they're called something new now. That was the place, but it was a very short gig there. And to be honest, the priority at that time was, given the house that we were buying, was financial security, right? We moved to a new area. The priority is to get a mortgage, get a house, get a stable salary, etc. So I was a Spark Response for a very short stint because it was much more of a logistics company. It didn't really appeal to me. And while I was there, I interviewed for Think, and I think I was probably employee number 12 or 11. The CDO and one of the guys there interviewed me. And that was kind of, like I said, from my first kind of proper job, really, because Spark Response was I knew it was going to be a temporary thing. So that's how I found the job at Think, because circumstances forced me to try and find a place to just, I guess, get a mortgage.
It's interesting what you're saying about how you were using your time at university to build your first business, because, effectively that's what Tariq was doing, how Think came about in the first place. He did kind of the same thing. So I assume that it was, I know you weren't there very long in the grand scheme of things, but it must have been a relative kind of meeting of minds. You seem like kind of similar personalities to some degree, is that?
Yeah, and to be fair, I mean, when I joined, this Tariq was CEO and I just joined as a developer. So it's a small enough company, everybody knew each other. I think the big change in that, you're right, and actually Think was an impetus to Hedgehog Lab, because when I tried to build my first business, I tried to do it in a products company, which was very difficult without all the marketing, etc. And what Think showed me is I could just sell my skills, right? Which I didn't realize. When I was 21, professional services was nothing. Growing up in India, you always had a job. Professional services wasn't really a thing. No one in my family had ever done business. So I didn't really know the avenues to creating. Like, actually, you could sell services for time. I know you can get plumbers and stuff, but you thought that was all tradesmen. You didn't really think there was any market for services for time other than just doing a job or freelance. So Think was a great time for me. Like I said, I think I was employee number 12. This was just, I think, before they won the Northern Rock account, which was transferred. They just won the Northern Rock account, and they were starting to beef the team up. And for me, like I said, when I joined, I didn't have much of a relationship with Tariq. I was interviewed by Gary, who was the CTO. But pretty quickly, because I became one of the critical people in that Northern Rock account, pretty quickly, obviously, Tariq, because I was on one of those two big accounts that they ran. One was Northern Rock and one was Granger PLC. We built a relationship. Yeah, it was very much a meeting of minds. And I said, for me to understand that was an avenue I could have taken at university was really eye-opening, because I'd never really thought about professional services or doing an agency. I never understood the dynamics of that business. And I think what Tariq had done really well is he'd taken that opportunity with what he did with the website, when we was at Revelation Design. He found a great partner in Gary. That was also, I think, super important. So yeah, it was quite inspiring really in terms of what they did. And in the time I was there, the company grew massively. It kind of gave me that thirst for that startup, that real hunger for where we could take the business. And I think we grew really, really fast. And we moved from, I guess where we were in Lisa's place to the big building. We're now in the center of town. It was a great, exciting time, and lots of long hours, but lots of fun and a great team really.
Yeah. So by this point, you'd already dipped a toe in the water and set up a business. Before that, you'd had your eyes open somewhat, I think, about ways that you could have potentially done things differently. You've obviously been you're a product guy, that's the thing that drives you, obviously. And then you're seeing the growth, and as you've already said, you're not a good employee. I certainly understand that, So how quickly did you want to get out there and start something?
Very quickly. Within a year, I was causing trouble. I was trying to talk most of my colleagues into quitting, which, to be fair, in retrospect, I thought I was doing the noble thing in those years. But in retrospect, being in Tariq's position now, I can see I must have been a thorn. So I was never really happy. I mean, we'd stabilized. I had about 15 months worth of wages under me. We had a mortgage. I'd saved up a little bit, and I had itchy feet. I was a really terrible employee, because every day I'd take someone out for lunch and try and get them to quit and start a business with me. And that's where I met Mark Foster, who started.
Eventually that worked, didn't it?
Yeah. So I mean, but one thing I was definitely convinced of from Tariq's journey with what Gary did for him in terms of the partnership, and you need those two people. So probably a year into it, I was like, I want to do my own thing, and like you say, it gave me a different perspective. And like I said, I was pretty unemployable. I didn't like the structure. I would never listen to what I was told by, my bosses must have hated me there, because I just wouldn't do what was asked of me, because I very much like making my own decisions. I very much like doing my own thing. And also because I was quite young, although Tariq was young, but by that time, quite rightly, he was bringing more senior people on. He was bringing more experienced people on, which is quite right for the business as it's got to mature. And there was no place for me. The two things I've got is I'm unemployable, but I've got incredible ambition. And, I wanted to be in that C-suite with Tariq, and there was no pathway for me. To be fair, my first thought was not to quit the business. I loved the place. I loved Think, and people who worked with me there knew that I was part of the furniture in terms of really being a team player. But it was pretty quick. Within the year, I recognized that I'm not moving forward. And to be fair, it was unfair to ask that of the business in retrospect. This kid that's come in a year, he's been a developer, and suddenly he wants a seat at the table at the C-suite, etc. This was a time when you said you got Ryan on there and Jonathan, all those people. So for me, I think they made the right decision for their business. Tariq was right in terms of, what was right for him to bring much more senior experienced people to scale the business out. But for me, if I wasn't sitting at the C-suite, or if I wasn't at that top table and I wasn't contributing, then, it didn't make sense. So within a year, I'd made my mind up. When I knew that there was no other pathway for me to go, I started having conversations with a couple of people in Think, in terms of what we can do, what we can do. And actually, we had this idea, funnily, of another iteration, because and the other thing is, agency was never in my lifeblood. Professional services wasn't my dream. So we actually had the idea for a really interesting financial services product. We'd seen a problem, with the Northern Rock account and stuff we were working on in terms of a real marketing problem. And we had this idea of effectively, again, seems obvious now, for building type form for the financial services world. So the idea was that we could effectively create these forms that marketing can quickly put together, wire them to databases and stuff, and you can quickly create a credit card application form without involving a programmer. So that was kind of the real idea of it. I had the idea, then I needed somebody to back it, because I thought if I do this by myself, I'm probably making the same mistake I did before, where I had nobody as a sounding board. Mark Foster was on my team. We had multiple conversations, and we both said, yeah, let's do this. This sounds pretty incredible. We actually went, after I quit, and we validated it, and the idea resonated really well. So that kind of led to us deciding, I think we're gonna move on and do our own thing, really.
So is that when you established Hedgehog Lab?
Yeah, that's the creation story of Hedgehog Lab. Not a lot of people know, because obviously Hedgehog Lab is now known for being a consultancy and a professional services company. That was not the incarnation of Hedgehog Lab.
It was basically a vehicle to make his product.
Exactly.
So did you go out and get investment? Like, how did you actually fund the early days?
We did, and that was the other thing. So, the maturity, now we'd start to understand a little bit about the space, etc. And we actually raised from one of the ERDF funds. It was a Northeast Early Stage Fund. We raised about 60K for it, which, again, surprisingly, because I'd never done it before, it was quite easy to raise. But again, that went back to, we had a solid product idea, and we'd actually sold it. I mean, I won't mention it now, but we'd actually, in theory, sold it to a top 4 bank, around at least trying it. So we came back with that data and we presented it to the Northeast, I think it was Northeast Early Development Fund or something like that. And yeah, we knew the idea was going to work because we'd seen a pain point that we're trying to solve. And some of the best products are like that. You see a pain point, you're in an industry and you're trying to solve it. And like I said, this was way before Typeform and even before SurveyMonkey had matured. And SurveyMonkey was very focused on surveys, whereas we were trying to build a web app tool where you can put together your own custom web app. What nowadays they're calling as low-code platforms. That was our theory. So we raised 60 grand actually for the original incarnation of Hedgehog Lab, but it was with respect to, it's great, but it was ERDF money. So there was, unlike private equity, there was no fear of losing it because it was, as it is in the Northeast in those days, it was free money.
Yeah.
So.
And are you still doing the coding at this point?
Yeah, me and Mark were literally, we built the system. We built the prototype that we demoed to the bank, and that was the system on the back. So Mark used to do a lot of the front end, and I did a lot of the back end, the infrastructure, and some of the product design and the project management, etc.
And was this a sort of a back bedroom operation, or did you get an office straight away because you had the?
It was a back bedroom operation, obviously, very short. So there was a transition period for when. Obviously, when we decided to leave Think, we got put on gardening leave, as usual, like as soon as Tariq found out that I was trying to steal most of his stuff, quite rightly, he said, like, this guy needs to go now. Like, he is not good for this company. So there was a transition period. But no, we got an office pretty quickly. And it's funny because we'll come to that. These days we think about the hybrid culture and remote culture. But there was no background. Like, I could not have contemplated. I mean, I had this massive Mac screen with the Mac thing. I could never have contemplated working from home because the Mac was on the foot of our bed and my wife would have kicked me out. I never would have done that. So we got our first office at Tedco in South Shields. So like I said, by now I'd done my work, right? So I got every free grant that there was growing. I even got grant to print out business cards. We never handed them out, but there was a grant for it. So I said, we'll get a grant for business cards. And Tedco were providing this grant-funded support for office. So we didn't pay a lot for the office. And we were clever because a lot of the smart people took the office bit of Tedco, like, where the nice, like all the stuff is. We took the warehouse bit because that was cheaper. And I literally picked up 2, like, that's iconic. And I think I have some pictures there. 2, like, I had a garden furniture that was broken, like a chipped table and a chair. And that was our first office desk and 2 chairs. Literally, you're on a circular office there, sitting across the chair, plugging in our laptops and working from that. And that was kind of, we got in the office on day one as quickly as we could.
Very nice. Our first office was at Tedco in Jarrow.
Oh, really? Okay.
And I can't remember the dimensions of it, but I would suggest that the first one was probably about the size of, 8 or 9 wardrobes strung together. But I think it was like 60 quid a month. For the first year.
Same. I mean, ours was massive. It was this as big. So because it was one of those warehouse workshops, it's this big. And there's us with a little table sat in the middle. And we felt like kings of the world, brand new unit. And there was just us, being businessy, making phone calls and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I suspect a lot of businesses started in Tedco. And to be fair, I haven't engaged with them a lot, but I have a lot of respect for what they do for small businesses.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So, not to bring things down, but at the minute, it sounds like everything is exciting. You're building this product that you maybe have already sold. You've started a company. But I know things didn't go particularly smoothly in the first few years, particularly on a personal level, and that you had challenges to face. So, what was the teething problems, basically?
There were 2 problems. So, we started with this product, we raised 60 grand. 6 months before the run on Northern Rock happened. So I'm not claiming that happened because I left Think, but there must be some correlation. But we were trying to sell software financial services. We'd pitched this roughly, and because we were market testing it, we said roughly we're going to charge 100 grand a year for this. And there was this angle. So there was two things. There's business-wise and personal. But the business-wise, the challenge was build this product. So we got 60K. We got a team together. We started building the product, and it, like I said, it got to beta stage, which is what we call it. And the original customer that we pitched to the concept had said, look, if you can get it to beta, we'll sign up for it. So the run on Northern Rock happened literally as we got to beta. And the reason I'm not naming this top 4 bank is they were involved in the whole mess that happened after that. So, but we were still naive, right? So we went, this guy, was the head of innovation at the bank, had said, if you can build it and you can demo it, we'll do a beta. They weren't going to pay 100K, but we tested that. And we were all like, we're going to be billionaires at the end of this. And I remember the run on Northern Rock happened probably about 20 or 30 days later. I still had an appointment with him because we were going to follow up. So I go into his office. Me and Mark are excited. We're like, look at this amazing piece of software. I put a credit card, and he was just sat there glum. And so I couldn't understand. Why is he not excited? Because we'd done the previous version, which was very much just screenshots and stuff, and he got really enthusiastic about it. Like literally, we had to stop the meeting because we had to get going for our train. He was that, and this guy was not interested at all. And we were all like, look, this transforms your, mortgage applications, credit card applications, etc. And he was sad glum. I finished the meeting, and I'm beaming, I'm the presenter, right? And he goes, Sarat, have you seen what's happening out there? I was like, obviously the run on the bank happened, Lehman Brothers had closed, etc. He said, if I'm seen to spend any money right now, forget, we were talking 100 grand that was our special pricing. I'll be crucified, and obviously we went from being really excited to we built this thing for specifically for financial services banks that no bank is now going to want. The penny dropped, and turns out that guy was effectively made redundant literally the next day. So he was in a redundancy consultation that nobody knew about.
If this was a scene in a film, the camera would just pull back slightly to reveal the revolver and the bottle of whiskey.
Exactly. So, yes, absolutely. And probably a couple of people with a coffin in the back. But and it was worse timing. And then the run on the bank happened. And to be fair, our investors that put in the Northeast Fund had said, look, can you pivot? Can you offer it to insurance? No, we can't, because insurance is decimated. The entire financial services industry is decimated. Can we pivot it to another industry? But the reality was the downfall of the financial service industry in the next 6 months, man, the economy was decimated, and no one was willing to spend £100,000. And we pivoted. And the thing that we didn't do very well was we should have pivoted into more of a SaaS model, get on there and everybody put a credit card in type form and 50 quid, etc. But you got to remember, we were crestfallen,
Well, it's hard to get your head around because you've built the right thing, for the right problem to solve.
Exactly.
If it's completely out of your control.
Exactly. Exactly.
Worst thing that could happen.
Yeah.
Product happens.
The entire market was decimated, and it was difficult. And I said, in retrospect, we could have done better things, made it into much more of a do-it-yourself byproduct. But at that time, we weren't rational, right? We were just panicking because my worst fear was going back into a job. Mark's worst fear was just having a house because he felt like he had to sell his house to make things work. So we were just I don't know what I'm going to do. And while we were doing that, one of my ex-clients that I'd worked with at Think basically approached me, and he said, look, Sarat, I just want to catch up for a coffee. I didn't really meet any clients because we weren't offering agency professional services work. So I thought, there's no point. I'm not that world is gone for me. And he said, we're doing a project with somebody else, because I delivered one of the last products that we did for them when I was at Think. He said, really love, your technical abilities, etc. And we have a tech project that's not going great. We'd love you to come in and take a look at it and, see, and just help out. We're not happy with this company, that they're not doing great. Come in and take a look at it and see what you can do. And I was like, look, we're not in the business of agency right now. We've got a piece of software. Do you want to buy it? It's like, no, I don't want a piece of software. I want you to come in and do 4 weeks worth of consultancy. I was like, no, I can't, because we're trying to figure out we're on the deathbed here. And he said, look, what if I cut you a credit check for 20 grand? for effectively 20 days worth of work. And and this was in 2007 or something. And I was like, that was more money than we'd see. Like, we'd made no money. We were pre-revenue for the last 7 months. And like, literally, we were thinking of, like I said, what we're going to do with our mortgages and all of those things. And it was pretty eye-opening, although we didn't end up working with that customer because, we didn't want any conflict with Think, etc. What it revealed to me, the same thing, because while I'd worked at Think, I'd never really looked at the economics, and I'd never really understood, like, I didn't know what the day rate was. Why would I? I was just an engineer. The commercials weren't shared with me. To know that my time was valued. And remember, I used to do peanut work when I was a contractor. At £1,000 a day was just like light bulb moment went off. And I was like, Mark, okay, like, this is what we got to do. We got to pivot, and we've got to just basically offer our services. But rather than just being a freelancer, now we've got a company, we've got Hedgehog Lab, we've got a culture framework, we've got a proposition of services that we can do, which is software development, web development, CMS development, etc. Let's just do that. And we got very lucky. We started subcontracting to a bunch of Northeast agencies. And obviously in that time, tech talent, even same now for 15 years, was rare, and people were glad because we were good engineers. And we weren't charging £1,000 because this client was an enterprise client, but we were charging reasonable rates, and everybody wanted. So that ended up helping us pivot from that financial services to effectively, what we were, an agency.
So at that point, how many employees have you got?
At that point, we remember we got the 60K, so we had 4 employees at that point.
Plus you and Mark, so 6.
Yeah, so four in total.
Okay.
So because it was me and Mark, and then there was a fifth guy who we got on just as almost like an apprentice graduate. Technically, he ended up becoming a full-time employee soon, but there was effectively 4 employees. And like I said, we thought we had enough to effectively shop out for contractors as a subcontractor. And because our 60 grand runway was going pretty quickly, and to be honest, they were great, the RDF fund, they understood that it was the market and actually wrote off the loan. So it was actually given as a convertible loan. And they were like, there's nothing to convert here into. There is no equity and we'll just write it off. Yeah. And we had difficult conversations.
I think around that now.
Well, yeah, exactly. And we did pay a little bit off because we had a little bit of, we said, look, we're not going to burn this cash and just throw it for nothing. There's a little bit to recoup. We'll give you back some of the money, just write off the rest of the loan and go. And that's where, and that's how we became a little bit of 4 people. And I said, after then we went a little bit bigger. We went 6, 7 people. So we grew a little bit on the professional front.
And you grew because of the consultation that you was doing, or there was like a 2-pronged attack? You pivoted, you looked for other projects to work on software?
Yeah, we developing new products immediately, or were you being led now by the market?
No, to be honest, we had some in-house products, but we were very much led by market. I mean, we were still dabbling with products. We were still product people. Yeah. We had a couple of products. If you look now, there was a bug tracker we built in-house called Fix, and there was finally my CRM bug was still there. So we built a couple of tools, but we'd done that when we pivoted as an agency to manage our own things because I was a cheapskate and I didn't want to pay for like software. So we kind of did it, and that's always engineers' typical problems. If we can just build it ourselves, we build it.
To be fair, we don't hire people to make videos, so I wasn't.
Exactly. And to be honest, it was an immaturity at that time. Now I play for software gladly when it makes value proposition. So it was very much. We weren't even selling directly to customers. So a lot of our original business was just subcontracting. It was easier to sell to agencies because we had none of the sales skills, none of the case studies. So we just go. Our pitch was, "Do you want a bunch of programmers?" So it's like, "Yeah, we want a bunch of programmers," and here you go. We'll do some PHP development or something like that. So it was a very open-ended pitch.
So we'll come on to what was the first kind of real milestone project for in a second, but if you don't mind talking about, I know that you also had a personal challenge, which obviously potentially had a massive impact on the business. So can you talk about that for a little?
Yeah, so like I said, in late 2017, 2018, we then pivoted to being like a web agency, right? I mean, we were an agency, but we weren't really, like I said, an agency. We were subcontracting, and the business was going steady. We just built it to like the mid 6 figures. It was a small business for 6 people. So it wasn't anything to home to write about, but it was certainly a good business. It was enough for us to take a decent wage, pay employees, etc. And we were slowly building it up. And in 2020, I got diagnosed with bowel cancer, which was totally out of the blue. I was only 30 at that time. And actually it happened, I got diagnosed 6 days after my son was born, first son. And that was quite a shock to the system because obviously it came pretty quickly. Like normally things like this happen over a longer period of time, and it was pretty sudden. We had about a 6 or 7 people business. I think that year we probably made a decent chunk of money, 600,000, 700,000, some decent money.
It's 2010.
2010, sorry, not 2020, apologies. 2010, that was right. So, 2010, we are starting to build the business, still subcontracting. We had some direct clients, Northeast businesses. We were building the agency up, and then I got diagnosed with this pretty serious illness. I was really fortunate. I know people like to complain about the NHS, but from the time I was diagnosed, within a week, I was rushed into surgery. I got treated. I got the tumor removed, and then I went into chemotherapy pretty quickly for the next few months. But the challenge of this was what I didn't realize is I only recognized the time when I was diagnosed and I went into surgery. What I didn't realize is for the 3 or 4 months before, it was all a bit blurred, because when you have bowel cancer, you lose a lot of blood, which you don't recognize, and you get a lot tired, etc. So my performance was already affecting the business. So there was a period, and you got to remember, at this time, in the 6 people in the business, I was the salesperson, I was the project manager, I was the finance accountant, I was everything. And then Mark was very much like engineer, CTO. He enjoyed it. He was helpful in every other way, but Mark knows where his strengths lie, which was very much around building stuff. So the business was really getting affected. The year before, we'd done about 600. We were trying to grow our team. I was out of the business for about 9 months roughly overall, including chemotherapy. And that was devastating for the business. And I remember doing calls with Mark, and he's like, obviously there's no more new business coming in because who's bidding for it? And Mark, bless him, tried his best. We used to get some inbound opportunities. He tried his best, but it's a tough ask for him to step into the sales role, etc. Thankfully, because our business was successful last year, we had enough cash, so we didn't have to let go of any people at that time. But it was almost a slow death, really. It was a slow death in terms of how we got there. And like I said, thankfully, because of the NHS, my recovery was rapid. I went from surgery to chemotherapy. It was mid-2010 that I was diagnosed, and by January 2011, I was back in the business. But the problem was there was about 9 months of what a key person was in the business not being in the business, and that severely impacted a business. And that was a tough time coming back into that, particularly after cancer and chemotherapy.
Of course, yeah. An uphill battle, really, I suppose, all the way.
Yeah, and to be honest, I feel fortunate, right? And I think, like I said, I was treated quickly. I didn't have to suffer with it for a long time. And to be honest, it was all a bit of a blur because it happened so quickly. And I feel it's immature, but I was 30, and all I was worried about was my business. And my wife was pretty upset about that. She's like, you're about to die and you're worried about the business. But that's, when you're in the moment, you don't have that out-of-body experience. Whereas now, when you reflect on it, you go, "Wow, okay." I mean, that was some surreal stuff that went through in those times, and thankfully, I said everything got sorted out.
Well, luckily, the health and obviously the business now, 13 years on from that point.
That's right. Yeah, 2010 to 13 years, very different. Yeah, very different. Yeah.
So did you have to implement any change? So just as an example, I know that you then did continue to be the face of things, the lead salesperson, for a while. But was it a case of you just kind of came back to work and carried on, or did that experience show you, well, actually, we maybe need to bring in some expertise here or change the team there? How did it actually reshape the business?
That's a great question. And actually, so and I talk about this multiple times. So when you have a life-threatening or a big life-defining moment like that, I've heard people have a life-changing thing where they just quit their jobs and they go travel the Himalayas or they travel the world, and they go, I need to take it easy, right? I could die any day. I had the opposite epiphany, which is
the beach, Southampton.
Yeah, exactly. I had the opposite epiphany, which is I'm not doing enough here. And so the two epiphanies was I'm not doing enough here, and the second thing was I haven't actually built a business. I've just built something that relies on me. So it was really interesting. So I had a very hard soul searching. So I came back in January 2011. Like I said, it was part of the two things. The business was suffering, and there was a big penny, talk about milestones. There was a couple of defining moments. I tell the story of Hedgehog Lab. One was that day when I pitched the financial services, and he said, Like, are you crazy? And the day I had coffee with the client, it was actually in the Ted Go Cafe in South Shields. Those were two defining moments. But the third defining moment was we were bleeding. We were about to shut down. I remember the month that I went to speak to Mark, we sat down. We had to pay wages with my credit card because the cash runway was 9 months of a small business surviving. Yeah. We'd not made any redundancies. We'd not cut people because culturally we were very, very aligned. And we were bleeding. We were really bleeding. And like I said, the epiphany was when I paid the wages with the credit card. I was like, we can't go on. Like, we cannot go on like this. And then a lot of soul searching. Obviously, during my time off, I had time to think. And like I said, I had the opposite epiphany, is that I wasn't working hard enough as opposed to, take it easy. And I went out with Mark and I said, we need to make a decision today. We either continue to do this as a lifestyle business, and it was like early 2011, or we commit to this, we put a proper strategy in place, all the things we've been avoiding because I've been avoiding it as CEO because I enjoyed the fun bit of programming. At that time, I was still doing programming. Yeah. So I was the project manager, I was the programmer, I loved doing everything. And I said, we've just been avoiding the real conversation. We've not built a business here. We've just done something we both enjoy. And the other thing I had, which was an epiphany, which was coming through while I was being treated, was I saw the power. I had my mobile phone with me. I bought my first iPhone in 2008, and I had all these apps. And the apps were incredible when I was in hospital going through chemotherapy because I could access our base camp in the app, etc. So the other epiphany I had is, we were tracking mobile. We were doing a bit of mobile. We were upskilling, but we weren't really at that phase of mobile company. We weren't really, The other epiphany I had with Mark was two things. First thing is we're going to stop doing everything else. We don't have a positioning. In fact, I think as I came back before we had the epiphany and before I paid the wages with credit card, I remember we bid for a project, and that was where that penny dropped. It was a website build. I won't say who it's for. It's like a famous Northeast organization. Website build. We had won no new business in 9 months, and we were just trickling along with existing clients. Yeah. So we thought the work was worth 50 grand, right? We said we desperately need the work. We'll bid 25 grand, half price, just to stay alive so I don't need to use the credit card to pay the bills. And the client called us back. We worked night and day on the proposal. And this was me after coming back from chemotherapy. Called us back, Sarat, we loved your proposal. Yours was the best proposal that I've seen, etc. But sorry, somebody else agreed to do it for 10K. And that's when the penny dropped for me around this conversation I'm going to Mark is, we have no unique positioning. We're just another website company, and there are a dime a dozen. A kid in his bedroom is doing websites. Okay. So I went in and I said, we need to refocus, we need to repivot. And we made the decision then and there in a Gateshead Cafe that afternoon that we're going to completely repivot the business. We're going to only do mobile apps. That is what we're going to do. And we went and announced it to the business. And also, by the way, we have no money to pay anybody. So if you want to pivot, we think this is going to pay off, but it'll be 3 or 4 months to work. Quite rightly, some of my team who had families and so I'm sorry, I can't do this. We have mortgages and stuff to pay. It was an amicable conversation. I said, this is where we are. Some of them didn't have the skills. We didn't have the skills. So I said, look, we're all going to go away and do our own thing. And there was this kid that was work experience. It was me, Mark, and this kid that was work experience. The kid's work experience is living with his grandparents. And he's like, whatever, yeah, don't get paid. Crack on, let's do it. I'll teach myself mobile apps. So we actually restarted. It was almost a Phoenix movement where we stopped all our existing contracts. We literally stopped our existing contracts. We didn't pay anything ourselves. Me, Mark, and Craig didn't really pay each other for the next 6 months. And we retrained and refocused on mobile apps. And that was at that time, people in retrospect say, did you know that was the right decision? I didn't know, but it had to be something else because I was not willing to pay another month's worth of credit card wages, and we had to do something drastic. So that was a big pivotal milestone for us.
So within the first 3.5 years, 4 years of the business, you basically completely rethought it twice.
Yeah. Those 2 pivots, really, big pivots.
Interesting. And from that point then, does that lead into, would you call your first real milestone project, was it a mobile app?
It was a mobile app. And to be honest, 2011, like I said, we pivoted. You'd think, instant success. It wasn't. It was really difficult. So we quickly realized why nobody was doing mobile apps in the Northeast. Well, there was a couple of smaller companies, but nobody as a serious agency was doing it because nobody was willing to pay for it.
Yeah.
So I remember like the first client we went to, they came up with this amazing idea, e-commerce, like, and we were like, "Hey, this is Amazon, guys. We've hit the jackpot. We're gonna, like, this is $100,000 project. We're in, a bet worked out." And then I remember we got to the stage, "What's your budget?" He said, "I've got 500 quid for that." And I was like,
Sorry,
500. And I was like, "I'm sorry, you've turned up at our office." He actually came to our office. Like, my office rent isn't 500 quid a month. And the penny dropped pretty quickly. And so we did, again, what we used to do, which is I got on the train to London. And this was, like I said, post-chemotherapy while I was still taking medicines. And we did the same pitch we did to the Northeast agencies for web, went to London agencies and said, "Hey, we can build mobile apps." Now that worked because London, there was a lot of mobile apps to build, iBeer, all these like silly apps. But, that was when mobile was starting to get big in London. And we were like, we can build. So I can't because of confidentiality, but we were the people behind a lot of those big apps. So we ended up start doing that. But the problem was that wasn't really a milestone because we couldn't claim credit. We had to sign like really strict confidentiality agreements.
The money flowing again.
The money flowing.
It's not building your profile.
No, we weren't building up.
And was it on the money front? Was it as simple a case of we do the work to the right quality, we just do it from the Northeast, therefore we're cheaper? Was it as simple as that?
Exactly. And also, there wasn't a lot of people doing mobile apps. That's really just, there wasn't. There were a couple of London agencies. Like every agency was claiming they do mobile apps, but they were using freelancers, so they were using people like us. So it was just a space that nobody was doing much in the UK. So that was it. The real defining moment, so the milestone came for us in 2013 when Jamie Oliver was releasing his 15-minute meals product. And again, I'd like to, there's a romantic version of this where we were the best mobile app development company and they came to us, etc. Until now, we've been subcontracting. So Jamie Oliver, what happened was they're working with a really big agency, the agency that should not be named, that basically promised them the world. And 6 weeks before, they admitted we can't do this. Like, they were trying to build the world's first second screen iPad app. In 2013, the idea was second screen is not, while the show was on, you could unlock the videos, everything was synchronized, etc. And basically, multi-million pound engagement. He had a book coming out, it was a multi-modal campaign and a video show Channel 4. He had a deal to produce an app. And nobody in the world was willing to do it. Because first of all, this agency had said no. So they went across every agency in the country that was credible. Nobody could do it. We can't do it in 6 weeks. There's no way we can do it in 6 weeks. And then somebody who we'd subcontracted with, luckily, said, "We don't want this problem, but if you speak to these guys, they might be able to do it." And at that time, we had about 6 people in the company. So we'd built the company back up to 6-7 people. These guys might do it. And they came up. We couldn't believe our luck. Jamie Oliver's, obviously we didn't meet Jamie Oliver, but it was his team. And they said, "Look, can you do this?" And, to be honest, it was an iPad. iPad was new at that time, fairly new. And they were trying to do a really complicated interactive iPad app. Most people couldn't do it. Their exchange just said they can't do it. And certainly you couldn't do it in 6 weeks. So the big milestone for us was we did a bet the house strategy there. I said, "Okay, right, this is it, guys." And it was a fair amount of money. It wasn't cheap. I said, "That's it. We're going to stop everything we're doing as an agency." We had only about 2 clients that weren't on time-sensitive things, and because we're subcontracting a lot of it.
Yeah.
And we said, "Look, we're going to pause your work for 6 weeks. If you want, I'll give you a discount. We'll give you 20-30% off or whatever." Yeah. And they were like, obviously, all agents like, "Oh, money off. I'll manage the client and get more money from them." But so we paused everything and we bet the house, 6 people, 24 hours a day, nearly for the next 6 weeks. And we launched the app in time for the Channel 4 show. And the app made like multi-million pounds in the month that it was launched. And it was a huge success. And that kind of really took us. And that was an app we built, not a subcontract. That app we built for the production house of Jamie Oliver. And it was a huge case study.
And obviously, as you've just intimated there, it was a paid app. Obviously, so many apps now are freemium model, but this was back in the day when people would pay 20, 30 quid for an app like
well,
that.
Not just that. It was not just paid app. It was every video was paid for. So you had in-app purchases for videos. So you'd actually buy videos, or you buy it as a bundle, in-app purchases. So it was paid everything. Nowadays, you very rarely expect to buy an app and have to pay for videos. and Jamie Oliver was charging per video or a bundle of videos. And that was where the complexity was. You had all these complex payment mechanisms, payment processing, etc. It was like I said, it was one of the first to do second screening. So literally, Jamie would start cooking, right? And you can pay and unlock that video there and cook along with Jamie in that time. And that was quite innovative at that time, which was, it was very much a paid app.
And looking back on some of the story that you've told us there about some of the software that you created, obviously the financial and all that kind of thing, was there a lot of projects there that came together in that one project for the Jamie Oliver one? Was there lots of things where you thought,
it sounds like we've
done that before, we could get this, we've done an app like that?
To be fair, yes and no, because we were trying to do stuff that nobody had done. Some of the second screening stuff, like the graphics, the other part was the agency that did it were great for design. They went away, and normally what happens in tech and apps is designers get carried away. They do something really fancy where you tap and the thing animates and stuff. It's really complicated stuff. There's 2D graphics, game motions. So some of it we'd never done before, and that's why we had to work 24 hours sometimes to just get through the sheer complexity. Digital asset management we'd never done before. We hadn't done things like the unlocking the videos and payments. So while we'd done a lot of the mobile app stuff, that particular use case was very new, and that's part of the reason why nobody wanted to do it in 6 weeks, because we're trying to really push the boundaries. But actually, culturally, that was one of the real definitions, and we updated our mission and vision after that, which is we are now capable as a business to really chart those new territories. And since then, we've repeated that model. We've just actually launched an AI service. We're one of the first people in the country to launch an AI accelerator service for businesses. And that's in our DNA now. We're always at the cutting edge. Right. So what that gave us is that real confidence and capability that if you want cutting edge stuff, come to Hedgehog Lab.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Well, the culture was going to be the next thing I was going to talk about, because, not to kind of compress times too much, but effectively that was 10 years ago. And I would say the current phase of your existence and growth has obviously just kind of been relatively smooth from the outside after those first 4 or 5 years. So obviously the culture, what you described there is literally all hands to the pump, everyone pitching in, everyone happy to work out of hours and all that kind of stuff. You've gotten to the point where you've got offices in different parts of the world. You've got a workforce, at one point, I think it was about 80 people, maybe more than that. But how have you managed that, and how have you been able to actually maintain the culture that you, as the leader of the business, want to have as the team's grown and has been physically spread out? Like, how's that been?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So I think the latest number in terms of team is about 120 right now. But I think, so this is funny, right? So I talked about pivots. So Hedgehog Lab, in terms of what we did, have done different things over our lifestyle. But one thing that has not changed is our culture framework. So I wrote down, a lot of people ask me, where does the name Hedgehog Lab come from? And that was actually the story, in that while me and Mark were actually funnily sitting in Nando's having lunches, figuring out what
could have been Chicken Lab, is what you're saying.
It could have been Chicken Labs. And I was reading this great book called Good to Great by Jim Collins, where, I've been an avid reader, and obviously I was like, I need to prepare myself for running a business. And clearly a book that talks about turning good business to great is a good book to read. And I was reading that, and we were thinking about company names, and we came up with, I still have the pad where we came up with 100 of ridiculous names. And I was reading this, and in it, it talks about the hedgehog concept. And I was trying to think about the culture framework. And the hedgehog concept is basically the idea, it's a Venn diagram where if you can find an intersection of what you're passionate about, what you can be best in the world at, and what drives your economic engine. So these are all things in the Venn diagram. The intersection of those 3 circles is what he calls as a hedgehog company. And there's a little bit of a story beyond that around, the hedgehog and the fox and different kinds of people. And so I remember turning to Mark and going, that's it, we're a hedgehog company, we're the hedgehog. And then the lab was just because it seemed really experimental and really cool and all of that. But, so when we did that, I wrote the culture. So the purpose of the company was to, and this was before we knew we were going to SaaS, etc., was to create a place that empowers talented people to do the best work of their lives. That was something I wrote down before we even knew we were going to do a SaaS product. So I'd written our culture framework, which is a purpose, mission, vision, values, etc., 16 years ago, technically, because it was well before we founded the company. And that stood the test of time. What has changed, as I said, is our mission's changed, because originally our mission was to unlock, to make simple, to make some like financial services apps simple or something. Obviously, we've changed our business repeatedly over the years, and so now our mission is very much digital product studio. So that kind of stuff changes because the business evolves, but the purpose hasn't changed, and the values certainly haven't changed. So I think one of the benefits, and you know what, if you told me that, it wasn't deliberate, if you told me that this was the advantage of what I'd done then, I wouldn't have recognized that when I was 25, 26. I did it because I just thought, I was reading loads of books on outside of a business and, Good to Great and all these books. And I thought this is how, I didn't know better. This is how you do business, right? You got to have a clear culture framework. You got to have a culture code, a culture contract, a culture framework. So I wrote that. And then as the business has evolved, to be honest, in the early years, we didn't really talk about culture that much. Again, there's 6 people, we working all nights. That is not a healthy culture.
No,
it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable culture when you have your board meetings at Nando's. That is not.
It's not the worst idea.
No,
I was thinking for you.
I was going to bring up our next board.
It's just a bunch of kids, just doing cool things. But the fact that we've written it meant we've been able to go back to that and evolve it, and now it's become embedded in how we do it. So when we bring new people in, I talk to them about the culture framework. When we challenge, so values are really important for us. So when we hire people, we look at the values. When we fire people, we look at the values. It becomes a code you live and die by, which, to be honest, in the early years wasn't. But the fact that we had one made it a lot easier for us to then evolve into that.
And does that help you spot problems early?
It does, because I think there is this certainly when you come at a culture, people talk about a great culture, right? And I think this idea that there is this templated singular great culture, like that every business can adopt, is just really difficult, right? It's not. Every business has different values, right? Now, I'll say something controversial. Investment banks or companies where you work 80, 90-hour weeks, right? People say that's bad culture, but it's not, as long as you codify that into your values and say, we're going to work ourselves to death. And if people buy into that, there are certainly some people who go, I will sacrifice all of this to make £2 million a year or whatever. Yeah. That is a good culture in the sense that what you're saying matches what you're doing.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And right? Everyone is effectively bought into it.
Exactly.
It's their choice to that's just something that you as a person might not want to do, but you understand.
Exactly. So I think good culture isn't necessarily just about doing good things about well-being and about psychological safety. I think people may say, and then that's controversial to say, but good culture is about saying something and being clear about what you stand for and what your values are, and then effectively living up to it. And so in that framework, it helps us. And actually, the challenge is when your culture goals are lofty, you almost never always live up to it. I get challenged by this. A lot of people, ex-employees, current employees, who sometimes a bit disillusioned with what we've done and go, well, you fell short on that culture code or the values you put together. Yes, of course we do. I mean, we're not perfect. We are a work in progress. But what it allows us to do, the way I say it is, it's like a sat nav. Every time you miss your turn, you know which direction you want to go back in. So you might then go around the roundabout or go around the motorway and get back. But without the sat nav, you're just driving around aimlessly, and that's the big thing, really. So it's not that we've always got to go in the right direction. At least when you're off course, you can correct yourself. And that has absolutely been like that for Hedgehog Lab. We've gone off course many times, and it's allowed us to kind of get back to where we need to.
Interesting. Very interesting culture again.
So to kind of bring things a bit more up to date, obviously in the last 10 years, you've gone through raising investment.
Mm-hmm.
That's obviously changed literally the structure of the company.
Mm-hmm.
You've got a different board, and your position is perhaps not position, but your day-to-day role, I'm sure, has changed.
Mm-hmm.
And then that, I know that was a few years ago now that you've recently kind of raised more money and bought another company with that. So how have you been able to, well, 2 questions really, on a personal level, how much has your day-to-day role changed, and how have you been able to kind of roll with that? Because you've always seemed to enjoy your job, whether you're sat in front of a computer or not,
Yeah.
always seem to find the joy in it.
Yeah.
So how do you do that? And also just what's the challenge been like, where I imagine to some degree you've had to relinquish some level of control when you've got these other voices in the room. So what's that been like?
Yeah, it's been a real journey. The second one, certainly relinquishing control, is tougher because what makes me a bad employee probably also, made me a bad leader in the early days, because I hated relinquishing control, because I wanted to do things my own way. And that's certainly the journey I've gone on the last decade in terms of personal improvement, in terms of, how that's happened. And I think, one of the good things about raising investments, there are good and bad things about investments as always. Like everything, there's this gray area. But one of the good things was it forced me to start thinking about that, about professionalizing the business and what my role as the CEO is. And actually, we raised 2 rounds of investment. We raised a small private equity investment in 2017. We've just raised a bigger one in 2023. And actually, what it's actually shown, but going on that journey has shown me actually, you can be a force multiplier, right? As a CEO, I can be an individual contributor, and I've done that for a lot of my life. But actually, I can be a force multiplier in terms of the value that I can add, and in terms of effectively bringing this team of people. It was a tough journey for me. I mean, I'll admit, and I made mistakes along the way, choosing the wrong people. Funnily, Good to Great, which is the book, talks about getting the right people on the bus. And I missed that lesson for a long, long time. But the reality
hard, though.
It is very hard, because the reality is, what I say to people now is, only by getting the wrong people on the bus do I now know what the right people on the bus look like, because you assume they're the right people on the bus. So sometimes you've got to make those mistakes. But it's definitely been professionalizing, it's definitely been, and actually that's where private equity has helped. Having a board, a governed board, a chair, a non-exec has really helped. And they push you to do better and really challenge you to do better. Sorry, what was the first question in that? So the second one was about, my personal growth and handing over.
Well, it was 2 parts of the 2 halves of the same coin, really. One is how you personally dealt with that change, and also just on a practical level, how your day-to-day has changed and how you've been able to kind of, you've obviously had to kind of play well with others, basically, in a way that you didn't have to before. So on a day-to-day business level, how have you seem to always be happy in work. So how have you managed to maintain that person?
So I think on the personal level, one of the things I didn't do when I was younger was I was very arrogant. I remember someone said to me when I was young, when I was just going through this, you should get a mentor. And I was like, because remember, I was the kid in school that knew everything. So I didn't need to go to college. So I had a lot of arrogance. I knew everything. And I was like, what is a mentor going to teach me that I don't know myself? I think that was a big mistake. And I think, the early years weren't as I wasn't as happy as I am now. I think I work on myself a lot. I think, talking about tips as a leader, I think it's a cliche, everybody says, if you worked on yourself as much as you worked on your business, you'll be very successful earlier than you think you will be. So things like mentoring both from senior people, but also peers. Things like coaching, getting a coach and getting them. I do a lot of journaling, for example, and journaling has really helped me. Therapy, I know, that's a taboo subject. People don't talk about it. But as leaders, you've got to project this image that you're perfect and stuff. And I think the time you acknowledge that you're actually like just a normal human being that is in a position that is of leadership and growth and making all these tough decisions. So the most important thing that switched for me, and I think probably it was about 2014, 2015, was I went from deciding I didn't need help to actually like I need all the help I can get. And that's not just, like I said, from the people I'm hiring, but also from effectively coaches, mentors, leaders, advisors, anybody that I can speak to. And probably one of the things I do as CEO right now is spend time with better people and greater people, learning from them and go like, how are you? Like literally, I just turn up for coffees, right? I mean, there's a joke like all I do is lunches, coffees and stuff as CEO right now. But actually what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to learn because, it's interesting, you talk about like, you say you're a success. One of the things I've had to work on is I've got massive imposter syndrome, right? And growing up in a household where my father's standard of, studying was, if you don't get into Harvard, MIT or Stanford, have you actually studied? So there's this idea, and I was always first in my school growing up when I was young. I was first at university. So it's really difficult for me. And one of the adaptations I've had to go is, if I'm not first, then I'm not good enough. So I've got real imposter syndrome. So it's funny because whenever someone describes me as successful, I don't see myself as successful. I see myself as being on that journey. And there's pros and cons of that. Being on that journey means I'm constantly improving. And what I've had to do is use a growth mindset to reframe it and say, rather than say I'm not a success, I'm saying I can do better tomorrow, and really kind of revisiting that and trying to improve. And that, well, since I've had the growth mindset, I think it's really changed in how I perceive situations and how I work with people. And all the cliches, hire people who are better than you, etc. And that's about getting the right people on the bus. So I've been really fortunate. And by the way, it's funny because I said I was unemployable and originally I was a bad leader. But one of the journeys I've gone on, and I speak a lot, we talk about LinkedIn, is teams. Like, I believe in the power of the team now, and I thrive. And, this is one of the reasons why, I can't get out of business now, or cannot be, and I don't mind being employed, I guess, but I need to be empowered in a team environment. So I really saw the power of teams. I saw the power of teams when, we built that initial prototype for the financial services. I saw the power of teams when we launched something in 6 weeks. I saw the power of teams when, we did everything we did in the last year to achieve this big exit for our existing investors and actually get all this. And everywhere there's been a team behind it. It's easy for me to be the face on the podcast or on the video or the ad to say, oh, well, this is all the things I've learned. But it's the teams that I think have made a real difference. And I'm really privileged right now to have a team that I think is one of the best in the industries. So really excited.
Brilliant. I mean, it's been really interesting listening to you and talking to you about. I'm going to watch this podcast back myself.
Thank you.
There's loads of great information now. I didn't want to interrupt you. There's quite a few things that I wanted to ask you, but
sure.
He was on a flow and I just
Sure.
But kind of a couple of things coming back to, like you were just saying there about your father and high expectations and obviously wanting you to go to medical school, obviously pivoting away from that. Sounded like they supported you at the beginning. But what were they thinking? Did they ever say anything like were they a team with you? Did they support you? What's some reactions?
So, now my father is fully supportive, is obviously very proud of me, and I think, but I don't, to be fair, I think it was quite a shock to a lot of my family because none of them had ever done business. And, I wanted to be a doctor since I was a kid. So, it's the same thing. You wanted to do something for 13, 14 years, and then you're 17, 18, you say, I don't want to do that anymore. And I think that can be quite a shock to people. And I think, it was certainly a shock, notwithstanding the fact that, I wanted to change careers. But then, in my father's opinion, at least, I was going into something that he didn't have any understanding of because, one of the big things about paternal thing is you give advice to kids. Like, say, this is my life experience. My dad never had any experience of business. So that must have been quite daunting for him to try and give advice. And like, what do you say to your son? Like, if I go through a business problem, I'm not talking to my parents very well now. So I've gone away from that arrogance of youth where I know everything. So I share my problems with my family. But I can imagine if you're on that side, your kid's asking you and he's struggling and he's asking you, like, can you give me some advice? And I don't know anything about running a business. But I think, it took him a while to kind of really believe that I can make it happen, particularly after my first failed business, which he knew about. Yeah. But I think, that's naturally any parent to worry about. And I think that my experience as a child, in my retrospect, the thing I would change, talking about tips and that is, if I'm a young person starting a business, I would bring my parents across on the journey. I don't think I did with my parents. I kind of got frustrated. The teenage angst and the youngster angst of, you don't understand me, I'm just going to do what I want, which I think was not helpful because I think they genuinely, it was difficult for them to understand, and I should have spent a bit more time really kind of bringing them into my world and giving them. Now I do, and now they're really involved. They love what I do, and he gives me advice now. So, but that's because I brought him into my world and started to talk about like how things are going, I talk about my problems, I talk about the positives, etc. And I think that's really important.
You've been. Does he ever say to you, there's still time to be a brain surgeon?
Funnily, but yeah, he does. Now he asks me about if my kids want to be a doctor. My wife used to be a nurse. Like, does she want to be a doctor? And I was like, Dad, no one wants to be a doctor. But,
Is your dad a doctor, or does he just respect doctors?
He does. I mean, you come in India, like, there's only two real careers you can have. Like, you can be an engineer or a doctor. And doctors are very well respected in India, although I think all healthcare workers should be respected. But and I think, as I said, this is aspirational, and finally I bought it from my parents. But no, no, I don't think anyone in my direct family is in the medical profession actually. So I think it was an aspirational thing, and like I said, to be honest, I think my enthusiasm rubbed off on it when I was young because I was so passionate about being a brain surgeon. And finally, I'm still quite interested in the subject. I like, there's a parallel between AI and the human brain, etc. But no,
I was going to comment on that. I was going to say it's very interesting to me that you didn't just want to be a doctor, you didn't want to be a GP, you wanted to be
a brain
a
surgeon.
very highly skilled brain surgeon.
That's right.
So yeah, it's I think that's quite telling. But I can see the link there, like you've just sort of alluded to, between your drive to do that and to where you've come, which I think is excellent. So I'm sure we could talk all night, but I know we all have to go home.
Yes.
I'll echo Mark, and I'll say that I'm sure everyone who watches or listens to this will be very inspired by your story. Really appreciate you coming to join us, and
Thanks for your time.
yeah,
It's very kind. Thank you for having me. Really enjoyed the chat, actually. A couple of subjects I hadn't talked about in a long time. So really enjoyed that. And obviously I'm a narcissist, so I'll be watching.
Well, this is the bit where I have to look at the camera and say, don't forget to smash that like button and that subscribe button. And thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.